My wife passed away on a Tuesday in October, and by Friday, my daughter had already called a locksmith. Not to help me, to change the codes on the safe in the basement. I didn't find out until I went downstairs to get the folder where Dorothy kept our insurance documents. The keypad blinked red. I stood there in my slippers, holding a cup of coffee that had already gone cold, staring at a lock that used to open for me. 18 years we'd lived in that house. 18 years I'd known that code. I drove 2 hours north that same afternoon to a piece of land Dorothy had never once mentioned to me, a condemned cannery building on the edge of Lake Superior, sitting on 4 acres of shoreline property that her grandfather had bought in 1951. The county had appraised it at $210,000. My daughter had inherited a $4.8 million lakefront estate in Harbor Hills. When I pushed open the rusted warehouse door and stepped inside, I stopped breathing. Hey everyone, welcome. Before we get into today's story, take a second to hit that like button. Subscribe if you haven't already, and drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. I always love seeing how far these stories travel. And one quick note, some details have been shaped for storytelling, but the heart of what you're about to hear is real. Now let's get back to what I found inside that building. My name is Arthur Benson. I'm 69 years old. For 37 years, I taught high school English in Duluth, Minnesota. I coached the debate team. I drove a 10-year-old Subaru with a dent in the rear bumper that I kept meaning to fix and never did. I am not the kind of man people write stories about. Dorothy was different. She grew up in Grand Marais, daughter of a commercial fisherman who worked the lake his whole life and died with rough hands and very little money. Dorothy put herself through the University of Minnesota on a partial scholarship and a lot of waitressing. She had a geology degree and a stubbornness that I fell in love with on our second date and never fully recovered from. She spent 30 years building a Great Lakes shipping and mineral rights consulting firm out of a single rented office above a hardware store in Duluth. By the time she sold her majority stake in 2018, the company had 43 employees and contracts with 4 different mining operations across the Upper Peninsula. I still drove that dented Subaru. We had 1 daughter together, Renata. She's 41 now. She got Dorothy's cheekbones and her grandfather's temper. And somewhere along the way she started measuring everything in dollars, including the people around her. Dorothy got her diagnosis in April of last year. Pancreatic, stage 3. The doctors were careful with their language, the way doctors are. Dorothy was not. She came home from the appointment, sat down at the kitchen table and said, "Arthur, I've got maybe 14 months if I'm lucky, and I intend to use every single one of them." Then she poured herself a glass of iced tea and started making a list. I didn't know what was on that list. She wouldn't show me. She kept a legal pad on her nightstand, and she'd write in it sometimes in the middle of the night when she thought I was asleep. I'd hear the scratch of the pen and watch the ceiling and tell myself it was just estate paperwork, just the kind of organizing that a person like Dorothy would naturally do when time started running out. She died 13 months later, on a Tuesday morning in October, holding my hand and telling me not to be a stubborn old man about eating vegetables. I promised I would try. 4 days after the funeral, we sat in the office of her attorney, a quiet, precise woman named Helen Park, who had driven up from Minneapolis for the reading. Renata arrived with her husband, Clifford. He works in private equity. He wore a suit to the reading, even though it was a Saturday. He kept checking his phone under the table, and I kept pretending not to notice. Helen read the will in a calm voice that didn't change when the numbers got large. To Renata Benson Holt, Dorothy left the primary residence at Harbor Hills, appraised at $4.8 million, along with the investment portfolio managed through Whitmore Capital, current value $6.2 million, and the entirety of her liquidated business proceeds held in trust, which came to approximately $3.1 million. Clifford put his phone away. Renata's expression didn't change exactly, but something in her posture settled, like a person finally sitting down after standing too long. Then Helen turned a page. To my husband, Arthur Benson, Dorothy left the property located at Marker Point, Cook County, Minnesota. 4 acres of shoreline. 1 decommissioned cannery building. County appraisal $210,000. And a sealed letter, to be opened at the property. The room went completely quiet. Renata turned to look at me, not at Helen. At me. The way you look at someone when you're trying to figure out if they're playing a joke. "Ah, Cannery," she said. Helen continued reading without acknowledging the word. "That's it?" Renata said. Her voice had changed. Mum left Dad a broken-down fish warehouse. Clifford put a hand on her arm. She moved her arm away. "Helen," Renata said, "there has to be an error somewhere. My father is 68 years old. He's a retired schoolteacher. What is he supposed to do with 4 acres and a condemned building?" Helen's expression remained professionally neutral. "The will is very specific. Your mother spent considerable time on this estate plan. Considerable time leaving my father with nothing." "With a property," Helen said, "and a letter." She slid an envelope across the table. Cream-colored, thick. Dorothy's handwriting across the front. "Arthur, open this at marker point. Not before." I picked it up. My hands were steadier than I expected. Renata pushed her chair back. "I'm going to need a copy of everything. All of it." She looked at Clifford. "We're contesting." Helen folded her hands. "That is your right. I'll also tell you that your mother anticipated that possibility. The estate plan was prepared with a federal estate attorney and has been reviewed twice in the past 18 months. Contesting will be expensive and is very unlikely to produce a different result." Renata stood. She didn't look at me when she walked out. Clifford gathered the papers she'd left on the table and gave me a tight, apologetic smile that didn't reach his eyes. Then he followed her out. Helen and I sat alone. "I'm sorry," I said, though I wasn't entirely sure what I was apologizing for. "Don't be." She slid a rusted key across the table. "Old iron, the kind you don't see anymore. Marker Point, Cook County, about 2 hours north. The address is on the deed." She paused. "Your wife asked me to tell you one more thing." "What?" "She said you'll understand when you get there." I drove home alone. Renata had already arrived before me. I could tell because the lights were on in Dorothy's study and the door was closed, which meant Renata was inside, going through things. I stood in the hallway and listened. Drawers opening. The soft thud of file boxes being moved. I went upstairs, sat on the edge of the bed, and held the envelope with both hands. Dorothy's handwriting. The loops in the A, the way she wrote the T with a little crossbar that tilted slightly left. I had watched her write my name 1,000 times in 40 years of birthday cards and grocery lists, and the occasional note left on my pillow that said something like, "I'm at the office until 7. There's soup in the fridge. I love you. Don't wait up." I set the envelope on the nightstand. She'd told me not to open it until I reached the property. Dorothy didn't give instructions lightly. 3 days later, Renata knocked on the bedroom door. "Dad, we need to talk." She sat in the chair by the window. Clifford stood near the door with his arms folded. "We've been looking at the situation," Renata began. "And honestly, Dad, this isn't sustainable. You're 68. You have a teacher's pension and Social Security. That's, what? Maybe $2,800 a month combined. About that. You can't maintain this house on that." "It's not my house anymore," I said. "Right." She looked at me carefully, like she was calibrating something. "So you're going to go live at that cannery?" "I don't know yet. I haven't seen it." Clifford spoke for the first time. "Arthur, we want to help you. That's what this is about. We've spoken to a financial planner who specializes in senior transitions." "Senior transitions," I repeated. "And the smart move, given your income and assets, would be to liquidate the Marker Point property. It's 4 acres of shoreline. Even distressed, that's worth something. Maybe 250, 300,000. That goes into an annuity and combined with your pension. Who would buy it?" Clifford paused. Just a half second. Then, "We have a connection in commercial real estate. You want to buy it. We want to help you, Dad," Renata said again. I looked at her for a moment. She was sitting with perfect posture in the same chair where Dorothy used to read on Sunday mornings, wearing her reading glasses and a cardigan, with a cup of tea balanced on the armrest. I kept almost seeing her there instead. Your mother left me that property, I said. I'm going to go look at it before I make any decisions. Renata exchanged a glance with Clifford. You have 2 weeks before we need to list this house. It's already on the market. We're having it appraised Monday. I nodded slowly. Then I better start packing. I slept in the guest room for 9 more days. I took what I could. Books, my teaching materials, the photograph from our wedding day in 1984, Dorothy's old geology textbooks, and the yellow croon sweater she'd worn on every camping trip we ever took, which still smelled faintly like pine smoke if you held it close enough. On the 4th day, Renata and Clifford had a staging company arrive to neutralize the house for showings. Neutral, in this context, meant replacing every personal item with generic beige furniture and taking down 40 years of photographs. I watched a man in his 20s carefully wrap Dorothy's diplomas in brown paper and place them in a plastic bin marked MESC and Joe and carry them to the garage. I went to the garage later and took them back out. On the morning of day 9, I found a brochure on the kitchen counter. Lakeview Commons Senior Living, Hibbing, Minnesota. Shared rooms from $2,400 a month. There was a post-it note in Clifford's handwriting. Looked into this. Very nice, close enough for visits. I photographed the brochure. All of it. Then I put it back exactly where I found it. That night, I went to the garage to load the last of my boxes and stopped when I heard Renata on the phone in the kitchen. The window above the workbench was cracked open an inch. I wasn't trying to listen. Then I heard my name. He doesn't know anything yet, she was saying. Mum kept him completely in the dark. A pause. Someone else talking. The shoreline alone is worth it. Harkin's been trying to get access to that corridor for 2 years. If Dad signs over the property, we close with Harkin before the end of the quarter. She laughed softly. He's a retired English teacher, Cliff. He has no idea what's under that land. I stood very still in the garage with a box of Dorothy's textbooks in my arms. I set the box down slowly, took out my phone, hit record. Renata kept talking. Something about a contingency clause, something about a timeline, something about making sure I didn't speak to Helen Park before I signed anything. We offer him $280, she said. He thinks he's getting a good deal. He takes it. I recorded for another 2 minutes. Then I stopped, backed the file up to count storage and labeled it October Renata Call. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning I said goodbye to the house quickly, the way you do when you know that if you slow down, you won't be able to leave at all. I walked through the kitchen, the living room, the back porch where Dorothy and I had sat on summer evenings watching the light change over the water. Renata was in the driveway when I came out. Dad. She held out an envelope. Open it. I took it. Inside was a check, $280,000. Her name on the account, my name on the payee line. Sign over the deed, and this is yours today, she said. No lawyers, no process, just done. You can rent somewhere comfortable. Invest the rest. Your mother left me that property. Mum left you a condemned building. I put the check back in the envelope and handed it to her. Don't, she said. I put my last box in the Subaru. Dad, you are 68 years old. What exactly are you planning to do up there? I opened a driver's door. I don't know yet. I haven't seen it. I heard her say something else as I backed out of the driveway. I didn't stop to hear the rest. Highway 61 runs north along the lake, and there is no road in the country quite like it in October. The birches had gone gold, and the water was steel grey and enormous, and I drove with the window down for the first hour, just to feel the cold air come through. 2 hours and 14 minutes after I left Duluth, I turned onto a gravel track that wound through stands of spruce and birch for half a mile before opening onto a flat, rocky clearing. The Cannery building was large, much larger than I expected. 3 stories of dark brick, the windows on the upper floor either missing or boarded. The loading dock sagging on one side where the pilings had settled into the lakebed over the decades. A rusted iron sign above the main door read, Superior Present Seek Entire. The letters faded to near nothing. Behind the building, 4 acres of shoreline stretched north and south, the lake filling the entire eastern horizon like something from the beginning of the world. I sat in the car for a minute and looked at it. Then I got out. The iron key Helen had given me turned in the padlock with a heaviness that felt like something final. The main door groaned open. I stepped inside. The ground floor was vast and dim, the ceiling 30 feet overhead, iron beams running its length. Old equipment was still in place along the walls, conveyor systems, processing lines, the bones of an operation that had shut down decades ago. Pigeons nested in the upper rafters. Light came through gaps in the boarded windows in long, angled bars. But the floor was solid. The walls were solid. The brick, as far as I could see, was intact. And along the east wall, facing the lake, someone had installed a row floor-to-ceiling windows, new, double-paned, recently done. Maybe in the last 2 years. They looked out onto the shoreline and the water beyond, with the view that made me catch my breath. Dorothy had been here. I knew it before I found any proof. On a workbench along the north wall, beneath a canvas tarp, were 2 envelopes, one sealed with red wax, the one Helen had given me, one I didn't recognize. In an envelope with my name on the front and a second line below it. Read this one first. I sat down on a wooden crate, took a breath, and opened the second envelope. Arthur, by now you've seen the view. I always knew you would love it. Here is what you need to know before you open the other letter. Go up to the 2nd floor. The staircase is in the northwest corner, behind the old cold storage room. There's a locked cabinet up there, pine, about 4 feet tall, against the east wall. The iron key opens it. Everything you need is inside. I love you. I have always loved you. You were the best decision I ever made, and I made a lot of good ones. D. I held the letter for a long time. Then I picked up the flashlight I'd brought from the car, found the staircase in the northwest corner, and climbed. The 2nd floor had been partially cleared. Old equipment gone, floor swept. The lake-facing windows up here also replaced with new glass. In the northeast corner, exactly where Dorothy had described, stood a pine cabinet, simple, solid, padlocked. The iron key opened it on the first try. Inside were 4 manila folders, stacked in order, each labeled in Dorothy's handwriting. Geological Survey, Lake Superior Mineral Corridor, Renata/Clifford Financial Evidence. Red tab, Harkin Resources, Conspiracy. Blue tab, Trust and Partnership Documents. My hands were shaking. I opened the red folder first. Dorothy's voice was in every line. Arthur, Renata began taking money from our joint accounts in March of last year, 2 weeks after my diagnosis. By the time I discovered it in July, she had moved $290,000 through 3 separate transfers, using a power of attorney document she had obtained by forging my signature on paperwork she told my bank was for estate planning. I found out because I still balanced the accounts myself every month. Old habit. She didn't think I would. I documented everything before I confronted anyone. I spent 4 months gathering bank records, wire transfers, and correspondence. The red folder is everything you'll need. The total amount taken, $290,000. I never told her I knew. I let her think she had gotten away with it. I set a trap instead. I closed the folder. Stood up, walked to the window and looked out at the lake for a long time without thinking anything. Then I sat back down and opened the blue folder. The blue folder started with a name I'd seen on a billboard outside Duluth, Harkin Resources, LLC. Mineral extraction and shoreline development. Regional offices in Duluth and Green Bay. Dorothy had written a summary on the first page. Arthur, Harkin Resources has been attempting to acquire shoreline access along the Cook County corridor for 3 years. This building and these 4 acres sit directly above one of the largest undeveloped feldspar deposits in the upper Midwest. Geological surveys commissioned privately in 2021 estimate the deposit at approximately $30 million in recoverable value, with surface-level silica and quartz formations that Harkin has already identified and been trying to reach. They first contacted Renata in February, 2 months before I was diagnosed. I believe the contact was coincidental. What happened next was not. I turned a page. There were emails, printed, annotated in Dorothy's handwriting. February 14. Harken's VP of Acquisitions reaches out to Renata through LinkedIn. Subject, Property Opportunity Ray, Cook County. March 3, Renata replies from a personal email address. Interested. What's the timeline? March 19th, first recorded meeting between Renata and a Harken representative. A hotel lobby in Duluth, confirmed by a security photo Dorothy had somehow obtained and clipped to the page. I stared at the date. March 19, 3 weeks before Dorothy came home from the doctor's office and sat down at the kitchen table and told me what she had. The wire transfer record in the blue folder showed a payment of $75,000 from Harken Resources to a consulting LLC registered to Clifford's name, dated April 30. Dorothy had written beside it in red ink, paid to ensure access. Renata became a paid instrument against her own parents. I had to set the folder down for a minute. Outside, a gull called once and then went quiet. The lake moved slowly under the grey October sky. I picked the folder back up. The final documents in the blue folder were a proposed acquisition contract dated August of this year, 2 months after Dorothy died. Marker Point 4 acres, Cook County, MN. Seller, Arthur Benson. Purchase price, $280,000. Buyer, Harken Resources LLC, acting through an intermediary. Seller waives all mineral rights, surface rights, and future royalty claims in perpetuity. The estimated recoverable deposit value, $30 million. Seller receives $280,000. Dorothy had written one word beside the contract. Theft. Then, below it, industry standard mineral royalties in Minnesota run 12 to 18%. The partnership I negotiated gives you 70% of net. Harken's contract gives you nothing but a check that clears and a handshake you'll regret for the rest of your life. I closed the folder and sat in the quiet second floor of a building that had once processed fish and was now sitting on $30 million worth of mineral deposits, listening to the lake. Dorothy had known all of it. She had watched her daughter make arrangements to take this from me while she was still alive. While she was driving herself to treatment appointments, while I was sitting in those waiting rooms reading the same 3 magazines over and over and refusing to cry in front of her because she had specifically requested I not do that. She had built a case, document, organized and filed. I opened the trust documents last. Arthur, Marker Point is held in an irrevocable trust in your name. It was transferred 14 months ago, 1 week after my diagnosis. No power of attorney can touch it. No guardianship order. No probate proceeding. The property is yours completely and cannot be reached by Renata, Clifford, Harken Resources, or any creditor. There is an ethics clause. Section 41B. If Renata contests the will, files for guardianship, or enters any transaction with Harken Resources or any entity Harken controls, she forfeits her entire inheritance, all of it, and the clause triggers automatic transfer of the financial evidence to the Minnesota Attorney General's Office and the FBI Financial Crimes Division. She has a choice. She can walk away with everything I left her, $4.8 million plus $6 million in investments. Or she can fight, lose everything, and face federal fraud charges for the wire transfers and the forgery. Helen Park has copies of everything in this cabinet. So does someone else. You'll meet him tomorrow. One more thing. On the ground floor, behind the cold storage room on the north wall, there's a small office space I'd built out last spring. The door is unlocked. Go look when you're ready. Take your time up here first. I love you. Trust the building, Arthur. It knows what it is. I sat with the letters until the light through the new east windows had shifted and gone orange. Then I went downstairs. The office space behind the cold storage room was a room I hadn't seen on my way in. A door set flush into the brick, easy to miss. I pushed it open. Inside was a space, maybe 15 by 20 feet, fully finished. Insulated walls, a wood floor, a wood-burning stove with a clean chimney stack, a comfortable chair, a small desk, a cot along one wall, a shelf of books. Mine, I recognized all of them, my own copies, the ones I'd thought were still in boxes in Renata's garage. The yellow-crooned sweater was hanging on a peg by the door. Dorothy had been building me a place to land. On the desk was one more envelope, Inside, $15,000 in cash, held with a rubber band and a business card. Thomas Lund, Structural and Environmental Engineer, Duluth. Below the name, a handwritten note in Dorothy's writing. He knows the building. He knows the plan. He'll come by in the morning, and beside the business card, the deed to the property. Already in my name. Already filed. I sat in the chair by the wood stove, still in my coat, and read Dorothy's final letter one more time. Then I heard the iron key turn in the padlock of the main door, the one I'd left unlocked behind me. A voice from across the main floor, "Mr. Benson!" A man in his early 60s, broad-shouldered in a canvas jacket with Lund Environmental stitched across the left chest. He carried a metal thermos and a brown bag. "Thomas Lund," he said, crossing the floor with a hand extended. "Dorothy told me you'd probably be sitting in that chair looking like you'd seen a ghost." I shook his hand. "Close enough," I said. He pulled up a wooden stool and handed me the bag. Turkey sandwich, coffee, an apple. He poured himself a cup from the thermos and looked around the ground floor, the way a man looks at something he's been working on for a while. "She hired me 14 months ago," he said. "Had me do a full structural assessment, commission the geological surveys, install those east windows and build out the office space. Kept it quiet." He shrugged slightly. "She said you didn't need any more to worry about while she was sick." "She was right," I said. "The building's sound. Some of that loading dock needs work, and I'll want to address the north parapet before winter, but structurally, this is a 1940s brick structure, built to last 150 years. It's lasted 80. Give it another 20 of proper maintenance, and it'll outlast both of us." I looked up at the iron ceiling beams. "The deposit," I said. Thomas nodded. "Dorothy worked with a mineral rights attorney and a geologist out of the University of Duluth. The survey is solid, feldspar, quartz, and some silica formations the university geologist got quite excited about." He wrapped his hands around his coffee cup. "Harkin's known about it for at least 2 years. That's why they've been circling. How much is it worth? The conservative estimate is $30 million over the life of extraction. Could be higher. I sat with that. Dorothy arranged a partnership with a mining cooperative based in Marquette," Thomas continued. "Family operation. Been working Michigan and Minnesota for 40 years. They cover all extraction costs and capital. You retain 70% of net royalties." He looked at me steadily. "Industry standard in Minnesota is 12 to 16%. 70s, she worked very hard for that number." "She worked very hard for everything," I said. He nodded once. "The cooperative will call you in the next day or two to arrange a meeting. Their name is Northmark Mining. Good people. Dorothy knew the family. Is there anything else I should know tonight?" Thomas thought about it. "One more thing. Your daughter and a man from Harkin Resources drove past the property this afternoon. Slow roll. They didn't stop." He looked at me evenly. "They'll be here tomorrow." Dorothy expected it. "What do I do?" "Nothing," he said. "Helen Park is driving up in the morning. She'll handle it." He stood, picked up his thermos, and looked around the space once more. "Dorothy told me once why she picked this building. She said she'd driven past it for 20 years and always thought it was exactly what it appeared to be on the outside. Old, broken, done. Then she had it assessed." He smiled faintly, said that was a story of most things that were actually worth something. He shook my hand again and walked back across the main floor and out through the main door. I heard the gravel crunch under his tires. Then quiet. I went back to the small office, changed into warmer clothes, ate the sandwich, lit a wood stove with the matches Thomas had left on the mantel. I sat in the chair with Dorothy's letters in my lap and the fire starting to catch and the lake making its low sound outside, a sound that had been continuous since before either of us was born and would continue long after. And I understood for the first time since October that I was going to be all right. They came the next morning. 2 cars, Renata's silver Volvo and a black company SUV with Harkin Resources on a magnetic sign on the door. I was on the loading dock with a cup of coffee when they pulled in. Helen Park's car came up the gravel track 30 seconds behind them, which I suspected was not a coincidence. The man who got out of the Harkin SUV was in his 50s, grey suit, company smooth. He introduced himself as the regional VP of acquisitions. I forgot his name as soon as he said it. Renata came to stand beside him. "Dad," she said, "we drove up to talk, that's all." "I know what you drove up for," I said. The VP began his presentation. He was good at it. Property challenges, regional market, the real costs of maintaining a distressed commercial structure on my fixed income, and then the number. $350,000, more than his company had offered before. A significant increase. Surely I could see the generosity in that. $350,000 for a property with $30 million in mineral deposits, I said. He stopped. Renata looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen on her before. "Your mother's surveys," she said. "Her surveys? Her attorney? Her 14 months of preparation?" I looked at Renata directly. "The same 14 months during which you moved $290,000 out of our joint accounts." Helen Park stepped forward at that moment from where she'd been standing quietly beside her car. She handed the VP a document first, cease and desist. She handed Renata a separate set of papers and explained in the same calm voice she'd used at the will reading about Section 41B, the ethics clause, the complete forfeiture of Renata's inheritance, and the automatic transfer of financial evidence to the Minnesota AG and the FBI. The VP read the first page of his document, then handed it to the man who'd driven him, and walked back to the SUV. Renata stood alone in the gravel with the papers in her hand. "You built a trap," she said, "but she wasn't talking to me. Your mother built it," I said. "I'm just standing in it. You can't seriously plan to live here. I'm going to renovate it." She looked up at the building. The dark brick, the new east windows catching the morning light. "With what?" "With the resources your mother left me." She looked back at me for a moment. I searched her face for something I recognized. The girl who used to sit in the back seat on road trips with her headphones on, asleep before we hit the highway. The 12-year-old who cried for 2 days when our old dog died. The 20-year-old who called me from her college dorm at midnight once because she was scared and didn't want to tell her mother. I found some of it. Not enough. "Don't contact me," I said. "Whatever you decide to do next, don't contact me. If you pursue any legal action or any transaction with Harkin, you lose your entire inheritance, and you'll be facing federal charges for the wire transfers." I paused. "Helen has everything. So does the AG's office. Don't test it." Renata got in her car. She sat there for a moment with her hands on the wheel. Then she drove away. I stood on the loading dock and watched the dust settle on the gravel track. Helen walked over. "She'll back down," she said quietly. "People usually do when the math becomes clear." "I know," I said. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt the way you feel when something that has been breaking for a long time finally finishes breaking. Quiet. A little empty. Finished. "There's one more thing," Helen said, and handed me another envelope. Inside was a letter from Dorothy I hadn't seen before. Short, written on a notepad page, different from the others. More hurried. "Arthur, I know this hurts in ways I can't fix from here. She is my daughter too, and I loved her, and I cannot explain what happened to her. Maybe money does that to people. Maybe something broke in her that I didn't see in time. I don't know. What I know is this: she made her choices, and you will make yours. Don't let her choices hollow you out. Build something. The building is yours. The land is yours. The view is the best thing I ever found, and I found a lot of good things. Also, Thomas already has a contractor lined up. Renovation begins in the spring. I already approved the budget. You're welcome. I love you. I have always loved you. Please eat your vegetables. D. Spring came. The contractor's crew arrived in March. Thomas Lund supervised every phase. The ground floor was gutted and rebuilt as open studio and event space. The upper floors became 4 residential units. I took the top floor with the east-facing windows and the full view of the lake. The loading dock was rebuilt with new timber and a proper walkway down to the shoreline. By June, Northmark Mining had begun the preliminary extraction work on the north end of the property. The mineral survey had been conservative. The deposit ran deeper than initially mapped. By fall, the first royalty estimate came in. Thomas sat across from me at the new desk in my apartment and laid the quarterly projection on the table. The first year's royalties, just over $2 million. I sat with that for a while. Then I asked Thomas if he knew anyone who'd worked with Dorothy on her company's charitable giving. He knew exactly who to call. The following April, I stood in the community room of the Cook County Public Library and looked out at 43 high school seniors from Grand Marais, Lutsen, and Tofte, small North Shore towns where a lot of kids are smart and a lot of families are stretched thin. Every one of them had applied for a scholarship through the foundation I'd spent the winter building. Every one of them received one. $5,000 each. No strings, just a push. I'm not a man who makes speeches. I told them that. I said the money wasn't from me, not really. It was from a woman who grew up in a town like theirs, on a lake like this one, who understood what it meant to want something bigger than what you'd been handed and to have to build it yourself. I said her name was Dorothy Benson, and she was the best person I ever knew. A girl in the front row raised her hand after. She wanted to study environmental geology. She'd read about the mineral rights situation. Apparently, it had become a small regional story, and said she wanted to do that kind of work someday. Surveys, resource assessment, the real work of understanding what the land actually held. I told her Dorothy would have liked her very much. Renata backed down. Helen was right about that. 3 weeks after the confrontation at the property, her attorney filed a formal withdrawal of all legal challenges and confirmed in writing that she would not pursue any transaction with Harken Resources. She kept her inheritance, all of it. I haven't spoken to her since. I don't carry bitterness about it. I carried it for a while, the way you carry something heavy without realizing how much it's costing you. And then one morning, I was standing at my east window watching the sun come up over the water, and I set it down. Just decided I was done with the weight of it. She made her choices. I made mine. The difference, I think, is simply this. She chose what she wanted. I chose what mattered. Harken Resources withdrew their applications for the Cook County Mineral Corridor lease. With the Northmark partnership already filed and the geological surveys in Northmark's name, there was nothing left to apply for. 2 years after Dorothy died, I'm standing at those east windows every morning watching the lake. The royalties come in quarterly. The foundation gives almost all of it away. I keep enough to live simply, maintain the building, and drive up to Duluth occasionally for a good meal and a walk along the waterfront. Thomas comes by every few weeks. He brings his wife sometimes. We sit on the dock and watch the ore freighters move in the distance and don't always feel the need to say much. Dorothy's geological textbooks are on the shelf in my apartment. The yellow croon sweater is on the peg by the door. I wear it on cold mornings. I'm 69 years old. I live in a renovated cannery on the shore of the largest freshwater lake in the world. I have more than I need, and I give away most of what I don't. Some people ask me what I learned from all of it. I'm an English teacher, so I've thought about how to answer that. I think I learned that value is almost never visible on the surface. Dorothy taught me that, and she taught me by example over 40 years of showing up and working and caring and building something that lasted. She saw what this building was before anyone else did. She saw what the land held, and she spent the last 14 months of her life making sure I would see it too. The lake is the same every morning, and completely different every morning. I watch it change, and I keep my promise. I eat my vegetables. I've been thinking about what Renata chose, and I don't mean that with bitterness anymore. I mean it the way you think about a road you didn't take, not with regret, just with clarity about where the other road leads. She had everything Dorothy left her. $4.8 million in property, $6 million in investments, $3 million in cash. She had more handed to her than most people will see in 3 lifetimes. And she looked at that and decided it still wasn't enough, decided that the condemned building I'd been left, the one that looked like nothing from the road, was worth scheming over, worth forging her own mother's signature for. worth 2 years of planning while her mother was dying. That's not greed in the ordinary sense. Ordinary greed I could understand. What Renata had was something more specific, an inability to let anything exist that she didn't control. The moment Dorothy's will became real, the moment Marker Point was mine and not hers, something in her couldn't tolerate it. Not because she needed the land, because she needed there to be nothing I had that she hadn't accounted for. I think that's the thing that hollows a person out. Not wanting more. Wanting is human, wanting is fine, but the refusal to let others have what they have. The arithmetic that says your gain must come from someone else's loss. Renata ran that math on her own father. She ran it on her mother's memory 2 weeks after the funeral. What I've come to understand is that people tend to get back what they put into the world. Not immediately, not tidily, but eventually and in kind. Dorothy put 30 years of honest, difficult, brilliant work into everything she built. She put care into the people around her, into the land at Marker Point, into 14 months of meticulous preparation when she knew time was running short. What came back to her, what came back to me through her, was a building that held more than anyone expected. A partnership built on trust, a community of people like Thomas and Helen, who showed up because Dorothy had been the kind of person worth showing up for. Renata put calculation into everything. She put transaction where there should have been relationship. She put a dollar value on her mother's last months and came up with a number she liked and worked toward it. What came back was a locked cabinet full of documentation she hadn't known existed and an ethics clause she couldn't outrun. That's not punishment in any cosmic sense. It's just the natural weight of choices over time. What you practice, you become. What you build with determines what you build. The thing I keep coming back to, the thing I want to say clearly, is this: intelligence without integrity is just a more efficient way to cause harm. Renata is smart. She always was, but she applied that intelligence to the wrong problem. How to take, rather than how to build. Dorothy applied hers to protecting the people she loved, to understanding the actual value of things, to leaving something behind that would keep doing good long after she was gone. Same basic capacity, completely different result. I'm 69 years old. I live on the shore of a lake that doesn't care about any of this, which is its own kind of comfort. I give away most of what comes in. I keep enough to live and work and sit on the dock with Thomas on a cold evening and watch the freighters move south. Dorothy taught me that the real measure of a life isn't what you accumulated. It's what you understood, what you were willing to work for without guarantee, what you left standing when you were gone. The Cannery stands. The east windows catch the light every morning. The yellow sweater is on the peg by the door. That's enough. It's more than enough. It's everything.